Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bruce Pardo. In December 2008, the Ortega family invited their adult children and their families to their beautiful home in Covina, California, to celebrate Christmas. Covina is a quiet town with a low crime rate, located about 30 kilometers from Los Angeles. Joseph and Alice Ortega cherished Christmas as a time to bring their loved ones together. They had 5 children, 2 sons, Charles and James, and 3 daughters, Alicia, Letitia, and Sylvia. During this festive gathering, they engaged in their traditional poker games, enjoying laughter and joy while celebrating together. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. No one suspected that the person at the door intended to harm the Ortega family. So, they opened the door without hesitation. A few minutes later, a neighbor called 911 in a panic, yelling that the house across the street was on fire. He urgently requested firefighters to come quickly. Chaos unfolded at the scene. Firefighters were dispatched immediately to put out the flames. However, by the time they arrived, the emergency service had received several more calls from concerned neighbors. Some reported hearing gunfire, while others mentioned seeing people fleeing the house and crying for help. All available emergency crews were sent to manage the situation. Later, one of the police officers who arrived at the house described the scene as an apocalypse. Everything was on fire, and a large number of special service personnel and equipment had arrived, causing many people to rush around. Most neighbors came out of their homes, watching helplessly as firefighters worked to put out the flames at the Ortega family's house. In the midst of this chaos, they quickly located Letitia and Katrina, her 8-year-old daughter, who had managed to escape the violence. Remarkably, both survived. Initially, it was thought they had fled the fire, but the reality was much more disturbing. When the police arrived, Letitia was no longer at the house. Her daughter had been seriously injured by a gunshot and was taken to the hospital, where doctors were fighting to save her life. Letitia, a key witness, was interviewed at the hospital and shared a shocking story that disturbed the entire city. She explained that during Christmas celebrations, a man dressed as Santa Claus came to the Ortega family's home. Instead of spreading holiday cheer, he pulled out a gun and started shooting. After the attack, the man in the Santa costume set the house on fire to destroy evidence. Due to her injuries, Letitia couldn't provide further details. Neighbors backed up Letitia's account, saying that at around 2:45 a.m., they saw a strange car with a Santa Claus image driving away from a dead-end street near her home. In an effort to apprehend the shooter, police quickly began investigating who had been in the area at the time. After firefighters extinguished the fire, they found the bodies of the victims amid the rubble. In total, 9 people were killed, and their bodies were burned beyond recognition. Forensic experts later confirmed that only the hosts and their daughter had died from gunshot wounds. The other guests suffered from gunshot wounds to varying degrees, but ultimately died from smoke inhalation and fire. Some of the bodies were so badly mutilated that they could only be identified through dental records. The initial situation worsened and police discovered another victim in a pool of blood in nearby Sylmar, California. Bruce Pardo was found dead by his brother, who had just returned from a Christmas party. Upon the police's arrival, they discovered 40-year-old Bruce had a single fatal gunshot wound to the head. Police initially thought Bruce ended his own life, as a 9mm pistol was found lying on his knees, with another gun lying on the floor next to him. Police confirmed that Bruce had recently finalized his divorce from Sylvia, from whom he had officially separated on December 18, 2008. Notably, Sylvia's maiden name was Arte, and she was involved in the Coven massacre. Police quickly suspected a connection between the murders. They believed that Bruce's death was staged to look like a voluntary act, implying that the real criminal wanted to conceal his involvement. It is believed that Bruce, who was allegedly the attacker, disguised as Santa Claus, ended his own life. The murders. Forensic analysis revealed that each of the 9 victims had been shot at least once. All the bodies had 9mm caliber bullets, which matched the weapon found beside Bruce's body. Later, police encountered Letitia. Despite the assailant's disguise, she was able to identify him. She claimed he closely resembled Bruce Pardo. Other family members present during the shooting were shouting this as well. With her testimony, police returned to the crime scene where Bruce's body was found. They began searching Bruce's car and discovered bloody footprints. They also confirmed that neighbors had seen the same car in the bay that evening, just before it fled the scene as the fire broke out. Bruce had asked Sylvia Ortega's parents, Joseph and Alice, to arrange a family get-together on Christmas Eve. This tradition involved the entire family getting together every year to play themed games. However, the holiday made them an easy target for a mysterious attacker dressed as Santa Claus. The attacker created a terrifying nightmare. It seemed that the attacker had harbored a deep hatred for the family, leading to such a horrific act, showing no mercy even to the children. Bruce had a negative attitude toward his ex-wife, Sylvia, and her family, which fueled his actions. The fire and shooting caused the most harm to Sylvia and her parents, whom Bruce despised. He was aware of the family's annual Christmas celebration and likely planned his attack in advance. This all felt too calculated to be a coincidence. Letitia continued recounting the events of that day. The Ortega family was gathered in large numbers. Sylvia, who was divorced from Bruce at the time, was present along with her 4 siblings, some of whom brought their children. Additionally, several friends attended the party. With so many people there, no one could recall the exact number of guests. During the celebration, just before midnight, they heard the doorbell ring. Although they weren't expecting any more guests, Sylvia's 8-year-old niece, Katrina, went to the door and looked through the peephole. She spotted Santa on the other side, dressed in his familiar red and white suit and carrying a bag. Excited, she told everyone about it. The adults exchanged puzzled glances, as they hadn't arranged for any entertainers in costumes. Later, neighbors mentioned that they had seen a man in a Santa suit approaching the Ortega family's home around the same time. One neighbor waved to him and wished him a Merry Christmas. The neighbor recounted that Santa Claus stopped at the Ortega house's doorstep, rang the doorbell, and waited. The neighbor then stopped watching, assuming it was just an Ortega family celebration. However, as he closed his door, he suddenly heard gunshots and screams, prompting him to call 911. The Santa suit fooled the guests, who thought a surprise was planned for them. They did not ask who the guests were and opened the door. He brought a bag, but instead of gifts, it contained guns and a homemade flamethrower. Letitia, Katrina's mother, grabbed a video camera to capture the festive moment. At that moment, Letitia heard applause. Her daughter Katrina ran toward Santa, who stood at the door with a large red bag. However, instead of presents, he pulled out a gun and aimed it at the child's face. Santa shot Katrina before anyone could react. Following that, he began firing at everyone in his path. Chaos erupted in the house as he ran out of bullets. He quickly retrieved a second gun with a full magazine. The assailant showed no mercy, even targeting children. In the ensuing panic, parents and 2 sisters sought refuge under the dining table. The attacker clearly saw his victims and shot them at close range, firing multiple shots at each, mostly in the back and head. Santa moved among them, continuing to shoot at the defenseless. He went through the rooms of the house checking and shooting everyone he saw. One of the bullets hit Sylvia's brother, James. Her other brother, Charles, screamed that he recognized the shooter. He barely had time to say Bruce Pardo's name before several gunshots rang out, and he was silenced forever. After moving through the house and leaving a trail of blood, Santa decided to destroy the evidence of his crime. He pulled a homemade flamethrower from his gift bag and began spraying fuel on the victims and surrounding furniture. Immediately, the entire first floor was engulfed in flames. Letitia said that the Santa suit caught fire and the attacker to flee the scene. This gave Letitia the opportunity to reach her daughter and take her to safety, but she was unable to save anyone else. Her child suffered serious head injuries, prompting a neighbor to quickly call emergency services. A 16-year-old boy and 2 other guests, along with everyone in the living room within sight of the attacker, were injured or killed. The survivors could only watch helplessly as the house burned, especially when a gas cylinder exploded inside. Firefighters arrived shortly after to extinguish the fire, with nearly 80 people on the scene. Despite their efforts, it took them an hour and a half to bring the fire under control. Police were initially skeptical, but a thorough investigation of the crime scene and autopsy confirmed that Bruce had indeed ended his own life, as no one else was in the house when he pulled the trigger. He also suffered severe third-degree burns to his arms and legs. Letitia mentioned that his Santa suit had caught fire during the incident, raising doubts about whether Bruce was actually responsible for the crime. It was clear to everyone that Bruce and Sylvia met through a mutual friend at work. At the time, Sylvia was divorced and had 3 children from her previous marriage. She and Bruce quickly connected and started dating. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and by December 2006, they decided to get married. Following their wedding, they bought a lovely house to accommodate their growing family. Bruce had a stable job as an electrical engineer at a large local company and also volunteered at the local Catholic church. Generally, people viewed him as a positive and helpful person, always willing to assist others in difficult situations, unless the conversation turned to money. Bruce always aimed to become wealthy. He worked hard, which allowed him to buy a boat and several cars over time. With their good income, he and his wife were able to purchase an expensive house with a mortgage, making their first payment together. However, since the house was located in a high-end area, their relationship began to suffer. By 2007, Sylvia started to voice her frustrations more often, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities she had to shoulder. She worked and earned a good salary while also raising 3 children, whom Bruce did not help with. Despite this, he took on most of the financial responsibilities for repaying the mortgage. Sylvia felt that Bruce did not contribute enough to their common goals. Despite this, she still took care of his dog. They had a joint savings account, but she believed that she did more to support them financially. Conflict arose over money because Bruce was stingy, which frustrated Sylvia. They had originally agreed that Sylvia would support her 3 children from a previous relationship, so Bruce refused to spend money on them. At first, their family life was relatively stable, but Bruce's greed soon began to annoy Sylvia. She expected their savings to total around $88,000. In 2007, when she checked the account, she discovered that Bruce had transferred all their savings to his personal account, leaving only $9,000. This incident significantly strained their marriage. Later, Sylvia learned that Bruce had been unfaithful throughout their marriage. From the beginning, he insisted he didn't want children and denied being a father until Sylvia found out from his mother that he had a child. Bruce had a normal childhood. His school years were normal and free of negative influences. He was quite intelligent. As a result, he entered California State University, Northridge. After completing his studies, he took a job as an electrical engineer at a large research company. Bruce excelled in his profession, which brought him recognition and rapid advancement in his career. However, this was not enough for him. Bruce became focused on the earnings of his colleagues and developed jealousy whenever someone made more money than he did. To cope with this, he started claiming more working hours than he actually worked. Those who knew him well described this behavior as an obsession with money. This obsession ultimately resulted in his dismissal when the deceit was discovered. Relatives noted that Bruce struggled with relationships with women. Although he was attractive and dated many, these relationships often ended abruptly. Financial problems were a constant issue in his life. Bruce started dating a colleague named Dea, and they both seemed serious about their relationship, even planning a wedding together. However, financial concerns became a point of contention. Despite having a good income and some savings, Bruce was unwilling to spend money on a lavish wedding, considering it a waste. He preferred a simpler celebration, but Dea, who was set on having a grand wedding, chose to pay for the extravagant event she had always wanted. Dea took care of all the arrangements for the ceremony and paid for everything herself. However, Bruce was absent. He had backed out of the wedding, running away with $3,000 from their joint account, which they had been saving for their honeymoon. Instead of marrying Dea, he went to Palm Springs by himself and spent all the money on his own enjoyment. This decision also ended his relationship with Dea. In the following years, Bruce dated several women. But his greed led to the failure of those relationships as well. Friends noted that he was consistently the cause of the breakups, as none of his relationships lasted long due to his obsession with money. This continued until Bruce turned 30. During this time, he met Elena Luca, and they eventually married and had a son named Matthew in 2001. Tragically, when Matthew was only 1 year old, an accident occurred. While Elena went to the store for a while, Matthew was in Bruce's care. But Matthew fell into the pool in their yard. When Elena returned, she found Bruce and their son not breathing. It is unclear why Bruce did not call for help or attempt to resuscitate Matthew. Elena quickly called 911. Although doctors were able to revive Matthew, he suffered severe, irreversible brain damage that left him partially paralyzed for the rest of his life. Bruce's erratic behavior led Elena to suspect that he wanted to abandon their child, whom he seemed to find uninteresting. Bruce then chose to leave Elena and their disabled child, without providing any financial support. This left Elena in a difficult situation, as she was not working and in dire need of help. Despite her constant requests and innuendos, Bruce chose to ignore her, avoiding all contact with Matthew and ignoring Elena's pleas. By the time of the tragic events, the medical bills had exceeded $35,000, and with no payment agreement in place, Elena turned to the court for help. She was later awarded a monthly payment of $240, but the amount was not enough to care for a disabled child. When Sylvia discovered his past actions, she chose to end their marriage. She was outraged by Bruce's lack of concern for their son, which made it impossible for her to stay with him. Consequently, she filed for divorce. The court ordered Bruce to pay Sylvia a one-time settlement of $10,000, which was significantly less than what he had withdrawn from their joint account. Additionally, he was required to pay monthly alimony. Sylvia also retained her engagement ring and the dog they had adopted during their marriage. The division of their real estate was still being decided in court. Bruce's ideal life began to crumble. Not only did he go through a costly divorce, but he also lost his job, which made his financial situation worse. Accustomed to a high standard of living, he could no longer maintain his previous lifestyle. They believed that during this trying time, Bruce hatched a sinister plan for revenge. Just before Christmas, Bruce purchased 2 handguns, an air compressor, a high-octane flamethrower, and a custom-made Santa Claus suit. He used these items in the murders of the Ortega family on December 24th. After the murders, Bruce contacted the police to report a vehicle parked in front of his Pasadena home. When the license plate was checked, police discovered that the Dodge Caliber had been rented by Bruce Pardo. The vehicle was equipped for long-distance travel, with everything needed for an escape, including a laptop, several sets of clothes, food, and maps of both Mexico and the United States. It is possible that Bruce had planned to flee the country after the murder, but then changed his plans. In the trunk of his car, police discovered 4 pistols with 13-round magazines and about 200 rounds of ammunition. As a result of these events, a tragic array of consequences ensued. 13 children were left without parents. The massacre could have been much worse had the children been present at the Christmas gathering. Following the attack, custody of the surviving children was granted to their uninjured family members. One of the hardest-hit victims was a girl named Katrina, who was shot in the head while greeting Santa Claus at the entrance of the house. Surgeons fought to save her life, and miraculously, they succeeded. However, she endured a long and difficult recovery thereafter. Toxicology tests revealed that Bruce Pardo was under the influence of illegal substances during the attack, which amplified his violent behavior. It also emerged that he had booked a flight for Christmas morning. Given his chaotic mental state, he frequently changed his plans. Just half an hour after the massacre, he purchased a ticket to Canada. His intention may have been to flee. Police later discovered that Bruce had intended to stop in Minnesota, where a close friend lived. In the days before the murders, he had called the friend to express his plans to visit. However, it is still unclear whether Bruce actually intended to make the visit or if it was just a hoax to fool the police. The police also discovered that Bruce may have been plotting to kill his biological mother, as she was the one who informed Sylvia about Bruce's disabled child. In addition, his mother still maintained a close relationship with Sylvia and the entire Ortega family. She was supposed to be at the Christmas party, but she was sick that day so could not attend, so she escaped death. Despite his controversial nature, those who knew Bruce had never previously witnessed aggression from him. He was typically calm and balanced, albeit greedy and cunning. Police theorized that a tumultuous divorce, financial worries, job loss, and an obsession with money pushed Bruce onto the path of crime. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Lynette Vonda Pontius. Lynette Pontius was born in Battle Creek, Michigan, USA. She was the youngest child in her family, with 2 brothers who were 2 and 3 years older than her. Lynette is very active, sociable and cheerful, so she is always popular in every group of friends. She very also attractive and caught the attention of the opposite sex. She never lacked boyfriends and led a somewhat carefree lifestyle. As a result, Lynette became pregnant and had to leave school in the 9th grade. When Lynette turned 16, she gave birth to her first child. She lived with the child's father for a while, but they eventually broke up. He showed no interest in Lynette or the baby. He disappeared and ignored all to contact him. Lynette's situation was difficult. She struggled to find a suitable job so that she could conveniently take care of her newborn child, and no one wanted to hire Lynette, a teenage mother. Eventually, Lynette found work at a fast food restaurant. To make ends meet, she continued to build relationships. She was interested in several guys in her social circle until she met Martin, a customer at the restaurant, who was 2 years older than her. Martin was from the same city as Lynette's. After high school, he took a part-time job at a private company owned by a married couple who made fences. He wasn't interested in pursuing higher education, so he spent his free time with friends. In 1999, Martin and Lynette started dating after being introduced by a mutual friend. Despite being somewhat bold, Martin was overall a likable person and always keeps a positive attitude. Lynette's relatives believe that he will be able to guide her in the right direction. However, there were rumors that Martin struggled with an addiction to mild substances. Martin and Lynette dated for less than a year, but during that time, he became part of Lynette's family. Her parents welcomed him with open arms, and he came and went from their home freely. However, love that blooms quickly also fades easily. Later, Martin admitted that Lynette was manipulative and accepted no disagreement from others. They had regular conflicts, which led to their breakup. It seemed like nothing special had happened, just two young people who didn't get along. But a few weeks after the breakup, everything changed when Lynette called Martin and told him she was pregnant. Initially, Martin doubted that the child was his, but Lynette insisted it was. A greater surprise came when Lynette was arrested for identity theft, cashing other people's checks, and several other minor scams. Her explanation was that she had committed these crimes out of desperation, as she had no other means of supporting her children. Despite her, Lynette faced the possibility of prison. To protect their first child from ending up in an orphanage, Martin chose to become the boy's legal guardian. He felt responsible for this child and wanted to provide as much support as possible. Martin was a thoughtful father who put his children's needs first. After Lynette's release from prison in 2005, he and Lynette came to a mutual agreement. Martin allowed the children to maintain contact with their mother, and during her imprisonment, he frequently took them to visit her for several hours. Martin made sure the kids had regular, extended visits with Lynette during her imprisonment. Martin has proven himself to be a thoughtful father. He took the children hiking and spent all his free time with them. Even after Lynette's release, life continued smoothly for the family. Martin and Lynette, who were once a couple, agreed on custody arrangements that allowed Lynette to have regular visits with their child. Lynette took custody of their older child. Meanwhile, she started dating a new man and soon became pregnant with her third child. She then officially published her relationship with the father of her unborn child. During this time, Martin had to leave Battle Creek and move to Kalamazoo. In Kalamazoo, he began a relationship with a new girl, Elizabeth, who also had a child. Martin and Lynette grew apart, but they remained connected through their daughter. At first, everything in the family seemed fine. However, Lynette became concerned as the distance between her and her daughter grew. Matters became more complicated in February 2007, when Martin Campbell was attacked at his girlfriend Elizabeth's house. During the attack, he was shot once in the leg and once in the shoulder. As Martin attempted to flee, he collapsed from the pain and shock. The attacker then pointed the gun at Martin's head and pulled the trigger twice. The attacker intended to empty the entire magazine into Martin. However, after 2 shots to the head, the weapon jammed. Determined to kill Martin, the criminal furiously began to hit his on the head with the pistol. He then left the bleeding Martin on the floor and calmly walked away. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation and spoke with a witness. Elizabeth provided the first clues about the criminal. Although he wore a mask, she noticed that he appeared much older, as she saw a mustache with gray hairs peeking through. The killer's behavior was clear. He didn't steal anything or attack Elizabeth, his target was Martin. This was evident from the brutality of the attack, which left no chance for Martin's survival. At that time, doctors were trying to save Martin's life. Despite suffering severe head and face injuries, he survived, which was nothing short of a miracle. He was fortunate because the gun jammed. Even a shot to the head could have been fatal. The first bullet hit his shoulder and narrowly missed a major artery. Had it been severed, Martin would have bled to death before the ambulance arrived. Martin's miraculous survival was also crucial for the investigation, as it allowed detectives to get information directly from him. Once his condition stabilized, detectives visited him in the hospital to talk. Martin and Elizabeth were certain that the attempted murder was not a random. This was the second attempt on his life that he had survived. In late February, just days before the shooting, Elizabeth reported an attempted murder while she was returning from the store. As she drove into the garage, a stranger crashed into her car's trunk, blocking her vehicle and the garage door, preventing it from closing. She got out and saw a black SUV, from which a weapon man emerged. The man pointed a gun at Elizabeth's head and asked where Martin was. However, she remained calm and told him that Martin was not home. This was a lie, as she knew Martin was playing with the children in the backyard. She lied to protect their lives. Her tactic worked. The man believed her and left. Before leaving, he mentioned that Martin owed him a large sum of money, and he was there to collect the debt, warning that he would not leave them alone. At that time, Elizabeth contacted the police and provided a detailed description of the man and his car. Additionally, a neighbor witnessed the skirmish, sensed something was wrong, and noted the car's license plate. However, the police discovered that the car was reported stolen and registered in another state, which did not help the investigation. It seemed the search for the criminal had reached a dead end. Nevertheless, a similar car was found a few blocks from the attack site in an apartment complex parking lot. The police attempted to track down the driver of the black SUV but were unsuccessful. The day before the unexpected attack, a masked man broke into Martin and Elizabeth's house and shot Martin at close range. Martin was certain that the killer had been sent by his ex, Lynette Pontius. She was the only person with a motive against he. Her criminal record raised suspicions, as she had previously spent 2 years in prison for financial crimes, including fraud and extortion. However, initially after her release, there were no issues, and Martin did not restrict her communication with their child. Lynette quickly begins to control things, and she wants more. She sought to control the process of raising her children and would behave brutal when she was dissatisfied with something. This led to constant conflicts. As a result, Martin decided to reduce the time his daughter spent with her biological mother, Lynette, which further angered she. Finally, she went to court to dispute Martin's custody. However, she faced an obstacle due to her previous convictions, which worked against her, giving Martin a strong chance of winning. This could have been the last straw, making her hate him more and more. Investigators had several questions, particularly about why Lynette had resorted to such actions. Until now, no one had ever observed any aggressive behavior in Lynette. All her relatives and friends knew her as a kind and cheerful person. Additionally, it was clear that the attacker was an older man on both occasions, suggesting that Lynette might truly be innocent. To find answers, the detectives decided to directly contact the main suspect in organizing the assassination attempt. They were surprised to discover that Lynette had left her hometown the day after the shooting at the house Martin. Elizabeth found it suspicious to exclude Lynette from the suspect list. However, finding and detaining Lynette was not easy. It was discovered that she was trying to flee the country, and a nationwide search was launched to capture her. During this time, detectives received another lead. It was revealed that Martin may owe large sums of money from criminal organizations. Some of Martin's friends mentioned that he had been in debt for a long time. Martin used to consume soft substances and smoke. He admitted this to the police but insisted that those days were behind him. Martin claimed that he only used these substances during his meet with Lynette and had quit his bad habits long ago. Before Lynette was caught, a prisoner from the local jail informed the police that Lynette had approached him some time before the attack, offering money to carry out an attack Martin. Lynette was searching for a mercenary to kill Martin. She devised a cunning plan. Accordingly, the killer must win Martin's trust, and after a while, get him drunk or full of mild narcotics to ensure unconsciousness. Afterward, the hired killer would eliminate Martin. Lynette believed it would be best to make it look like an accident. Overall, she didn't care about the method, as long as Martin dies, so that she can gain custody of their daughter. Later, the police gathered evidence from various individuals who reported receiving similar requests and provocations from Lynette. Many people claimed that she had tried to hire them as mercenaries, but none of them were actual shooters, and they all declined the offer. Fortunately, the police quickly identified the killer, who was likely the person who agreed to help Lynette. This suspect was a 59-year-old man named Joseph Lover, who was romantically involved with Lynette. He had a history of involvement in numerous serious crimes. Joseph fit the description of the attacker and was capable of carrying out such a bold attack in broad daylight. The brutal massacre aligned with the style of Joseph, a man who had spent most of his life in prison. However, when the police attempted to locate him, they discovered that he had left the city around the same time Lynette disappeared. It is likely that they fled together. Lynette and Joseph managed to stay hidden until February 13, 2007, when they were discovered near the Mexico-US border. They had been planning to escape to another country to avoid facing justice. However, Lynette realized she needed to retrieve some important documents she had left behind in Mexico and had to return for them. Unfortunately for them, the police were already there waiting to capture them. 5 days later, they were taken into custody, which was a great relief for Martin, who was worried about another attack. Although he was pleased with the arrest, the investigation struggled to communicate with the criminals. Surprisingly, Joseph was very cooperative with the detectives. He admitted he was driving a stolen car and having a pistol, hoping for a reduced sentence. However, he consistently denied being involved in the attack and attempted murder of Martin. Lynette partially backed up his claims, stating she had hired a mercenary to confront Martin. Her intention, she said, was not to kill him but to scare him into relinquishing custody of their daughter. Being separated from her daughter made Lynette extremely miserable. She claimed that Martin did not allow her to see her daughter. Additionally, she alleged that she found evidence of Martin abusing her daughter. Lynette accused Martin of substance abuse and domestic violence. She also shared details about their relationship, stating that Martin had repeatedly beaten her, which led to their breakup. Lynette did not see him as a benefactor, said that he took advantage of her difficult circumstances when their daughter was born. He allegedly forced her to sign documents and formalize guardianship while she was helpless in prison. She believes Martin acted shamelessly in taking advantage of her situation. The interrogations of the two suspects, Lynette and Joseph, happened at the same time, but in different rooms to compare their stories. The investigators, having received information from Lynette, decided to confront Joseph. Initially, Joseph refused to tell the truth. However, once he learned that Lynette the crime was trying to turn him in to the police, Joseph changed his story. He claimed that Lynette had first approached him in 2007 with a request to kill Martin. Lynette didn't care how Martin died, she just wanted him gone forever. The plan was for Martin to disappear without any witnesses, and his body would be disposed of discreetly. But Lynette didn't expect Joseph to act in a dramatic manner. Joseph's story matched with what the police already knew. During the investigation, the police chose to disclose this information to observe Lynette's response. Lynette, however, cleverly refused to give a statement and asked for a lawyer. Prosecutors claimed that Lynette's main motive was her dissatisfaction with the decisions regarding her child's upbringing and restrictions on communicating with him. She tried to challenge custody in court but was unsuccessful. After that, Lynette didn't stop and decided to hire a hitman. Joseph Lover, 51 years old, was also charged with attempted murder. This man admitted his guilt and provided the police with a detailed report. The trial was full of surprises, starting when Joseph unexpectedly changed his earlier testimony during the hearing. He retracted his previous statements and took full responsibility for the incident, claiming that Lynette was not involved and that he was solely responsible for planning and executing the assassination attempt. It seemed like Joseph loved Lynette so much that he wanted to protect her. However, before the next stage of the hearing, Joseph shocked everyone again by reverting to his original story, asserting that Lynette had hired him as a hitman. To obtain these confessions the prosecution suggested a plea deal. In this case, the prosecutor's office re-entered the proceedings, aiming to demonstrate that Lynette had a justified motive. Lynette clearly disliked Martin due to dissatisfaction with custody arrangements. However, the prosecutor's office relied on very limited evidence. In reality, there was nothing concrete to directly implicate Lynette in the crime. There were no phone records or messages, and Joseph, the sole witness, was unreliable, which weakened the prosecution's position. Lynette's lawyer effectively used these weaknesses to persuade the jury of her innocence. On October 3rd of that year, Joseph confirmed to the jury that Lynette was the mastermind behind the plan to kill Martin. He confirmed that she had formulated the whole plan. However, his numerous contradictions and retractions during the testimony made the jury question his credibility. The defense then made a surprising move. According to Lynette, Martin was an abusive father who often physically harmed his daughter. She presented photos showing bruises on the child's arms and back as evidence. In response, Martin's family defended him by disputing these accusations. They suggested the photos only showed minor abrasions that a child might get accidentally, arguing they did not resemble signs of abuse. They even implied that Lynette herself might have caused the bruises. Despite the defenses put forward by Martin's relatives, Lynette successfully raised doubts in the jury's minds, she portraying herself as a victim. This thing aimed to make Martin's murder seem like an act of kindness in protection of the child. In the end, the lawyers portrayed her accomplice, Joseph, as a true hero. They argued that Joseph was protecting Lynette and her daughter. Lynette did not ask for Martin to be killed, she only wanted to scare him. However, Joseph, a seasoned criminal, believed he was rescuing the girl from cruelty and tyranny, which led him to kill Martin. Additionally, the defense argued that Lynette could not have planned the murder herself, because if that had happened, she would likely have faced life in prison. This was inconsistent with the image of a loving, caring mother seeking custody of her child. Now, the jury had to make a decision in this complicated case. On October 5, 2007, after lengthy discussions, the jury announced the verdict in this case. Lynette was found guilty of orchestrating the attack. Her extravagant lifestyle and criminal record worked against her. The jury didn't believe the lawyer who portrayed Martin as an abuser involved in domestic violence against the child. In fact, there was no evidence to support these claims. Lynette's family was shocked by the jury's verdict. Initially, Lynette was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years, but the sentence was later changed. However, the judge considered Lynette to be a socially dangerous person. He sincerely expressed his hope that no parole board would ever decide to release the woman. Lynette remains in the Huron Correctional Facility for Women. She has served enough of her sentence to apply for parole and has submitted a petition. Lynette is hopeful about being released soon, but no decision has been made yet. Martin's family hopes she will never be released. Her accomplice, Joseph, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Judy Blake Moylanen. Judy Diane Blake was born on October 16, 1957, into a conservative family in Hancock, Michigan. As the only daughter of Dale and Mary Ann Blake, she was cherished by her parents and her two brothers, Jerry and David. In addition to being active members of the Redeemer Free Lutheran Church, her parents owned a business named Dale Service, which allowed them to give their children a loving and comfortable life. Judy grew up to be a beautiful young woman who dreamed of having her own family. In 1974, she met the love of her life, Bruce Moylanen. Both worked in healthcare. Judy was a nurse, and Bruce was support staff. Bruce was 3 years older and had a very different personality. While Judy was shy and sweet, Bruce was outgoing and confident. Judy came from a tight-knit and religious family, whereas Bruce did not have a close relationship with his own. Despite their differences, they get along very well. Judy admired Bruce's confidence, and Bruce saw Judy as the ideal partner to build a life with. However, Judy's family had their doubts about Bruce, even though she was fully supportive of him. Judy and Bruce married in 1978. Over the years, Judy's family made significant efforts to include Bruce as part of their family, and it appeared that he bonded well with them. The family celebrated the arrival of Judy and Bruce's only daughter, Elise, in 1989. For several years, they enjoyed a happy life together, unaware that everything was about to change dramatically. On November 29, 1992, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, Judy and Bruce were visiting the Blakes with their young daughter, Elise. It was also the final day of the hunting season in the Upper Peninsula. That morning, Bruce went with Judy's brothers to hunt for deer in the nearby woods, while Judy stayed at the house with her mother and daughter. In the afternoon, Judy took her parents' dog, Streak, for a walk in the woods behind the Blakes' property on Highway 38 in Ontonagon County, Michigan. As Mary Ann said goodbye, she didn't know it would be the last time she would see her daughter. After 2.5 hours without any word from Judy, Mary Ann started to worry about her safety. Even though Judy knew the woods well, there was a chance she could have had an accident or run into trouble, especially since it was still hunting season. Concerned, Mary Ann took a neighbor with her and went into the woods to search for her daughter. They were trying to follow Judy's footsteps on the walking path, but it was getting darker and harder to see. After nearly an hour, Mary Ann stumbled upon a harrowing sight that no mother should ever see. About 500 to 600 feet into the woods, Mary Ann and the neighbor found Judy lying still on her side. Her dogs were nearby, wandering alone. When they turned Judy onto her back, they discovered a bloody chest wound, and it was clear that she was already deceased. Screaming at the top of her lungs, Mary Ann rushed back to her house to inform the local authorities about what had happened. Investigators quickly determined that Judy had died from a gunshot wound. As the night grew colder, police officers searched the woods for evidence, relying only on their flashlights. Despite thoroughly searching the area, detectives found very few clues. They couldn't locate the bullet that killed Judy, but they did discover an important piece of evidence. It was a scorch mark on a maple tree. Bob Ball, the lead detective on the case, concluded that the blaze mark could have been made by the same bullet that killed Judy. He believed that if he could locate the bullet, he could trace it back to the shooter, which would provide insights into how Judy was shot. Forensic tests on the scrapings later confirmed that the mark was caused by a bullet impact. By analyzing the position of the body and the blaze mark, investigators determined that the bullet struck Judy first, passed through her heart, exited her body through the left side, hit a tree, and then landed somewhere in the woods. At the time, the incident was viewed as a tragic accident. Investigators thought that Judy was accidentally shot by a stray bullet from an unknown hunter, which was not uncommon in that part of the Upper Peninsula. In fact, there had been a few similar hunting incidents in the area before this one. Unfortunately, it was challenging to find the person responsible for Judy's death because bullets from high-powered hunting rifles can travel over 3 miles. Often, hunters are unaware that their bullets have harmed someone. Detective Bob aimed to remain open-minded as Judy's body was transported to the medical examiner's office. Meanwhile, the detectives began interviewing family members. Although everyone appeared deeply distressed by the tragedy, one comment from Bruce raised Detective Bob's concerns. Bruce criticized his late wife for not being more cautious and for not wearing orange while in the woods. This drew suspicion towards him, as it is common for investigators to focus on those closest to the victim in cases of violent crime. However, Detective Bob also believes that Bruce is just a grieving husband trying to hide his sadness. Additionally, Judy's family maintained that Bruce was with them all day and were convinced he had no involvement in their daughter's death. They expressed frustration towards the police for considering him a suspect. This marked the beginning of a complicated investigation. 2 days later, the autopsy report provided important information. the estimated time of death was around 3 p.m. When Detective Bob returned to question the Blake family with this new detail, they admitted that while Bruce spent most of the day with them, they did not keep an eye on him during that specific time. Despite this, they remained unfazed and strongly believed in his innocence, openly defending him. They were unhappy with the investigation because they believed the police had wrongly targeted a man who was still grieving his wife's death. At that time, Judy's family was unaware that detectives had additional reasons to suspect her death was not accidental. Forensic evidence revealed that the bullet entered her body at a lower point than it exited, indicating it passed through at an upward angle. This detail was crucial. If a hunter had fired the shot, the bullet would have entered at a downward angle, suggesting it came from a greater distance. It now seemed almost certain that Judy had been intentionally killed. Was Bruce truly involved, or was he merely a target of the detectives' narrow focus? Due to this new evidence and doubts about his alibi, the detectives decided to investigate Bruce Moylanen more closely. On December 11, 1992, just 12 days after the investigation began, Bruce was called to the sheriff's office for formal questioning. Within minutes, during his conversation with Bob Ball, Bruce provided a detailed account of where he was on the day his wife died, naming nearly 30 different people who could corroborate his story. Despite his detailed account of the day's events, there was a missing 30-minute gap that he could not explain. Detective Bob grew suspicious of him, especially since he consistently denied any involvement in his wife's death. During the interview, Bob questioned whether Bruce was actually interested in hunting deer that afternoon or if he had other intentions. While the matter of Bruce's innocence remained unresolved, his actions suggested otherwise. He hardly seemed to mourn. Just weeks after Judy's death, he was going on ski trips, socializing with friends, and flirting with some of Judy's acquaintances instead of focusing on his wife. By this point, even Judy's family had started to doubt him, despite their earlier support. His behavior was the reason for their suspicions. Detectives were actively investigating the case but had not found any concrete evidence against him. To gather more information, Detective Bob asked some of Bruce's friends and co-workers to discreetly monitor him and inform the police if they noticed anything unusual. This led to a shocking discovery. Detective Bob made a call to 35-year-old Gail Lampinen, who worked with Bruce. She had a story about him. After the funeral, Bruce unexpectedly showed up at her house with 5 boxes containing his deceased wife's belongings. He placed the boxes on Gail's porch and walked away before she could ask him anything. Because it was the holiday season, Gail left the boxes outside for some time without looking inside. When she finally opened the boxes, Gail discovered that they were filled mostly with Judy's clothes. However, beneath the clothing in one of the boxes, she found a letter dated 6 months earlier and signed by Judy. This discovery was surprising for Gail, as she had only met Judy once. What made it even more unusual was the content of the letter. It began with Judy expressing her wish for Gail to have her old clothes as keepsake gifts, as she believed Gail was the only person Bruce truly trusted. The letter further revealed intimate details about Bruce and Judy's marriage, indicating that they no longer saw eye to eye and were close to separating. It also mentioned that Bruce needed a new girlfriend. The most unusual aspect of the letter was that the writer complimented Bruce's abilities in bed. This raised a red flag for Gail, who immediately sensed something was off, and the detectives shared her suspicion. To verify the letter's authenticity, they approached forensic document examiner James Stiegel. His job was to compare the letter to Judy's known handwriting samples to see if she had written it. Handwriting analysis revealed that the letter's writing was slow and deliberate, which could indicate it was forged. Ultimately, Judy was not the author of the letter, but the handwriting did not definitively link it to Bruce. Detectives struggled to find solid evidence against Bruce and had to make do with their limited resources. To gather more information, Detective Bob decided to speak with Gail again. During their interviews, Gail told the investigators that Bruce had been trying to get her attention for a long time, even before Judy's death. However, Gail, who was married, found Bruce to be annoying and persistent. Despite his advances, she chose to ignore him, hoping he would eventually lose interest and leave her alone. Gail wasn't the only one who had a negative opinion of Bruce. In fact, no one had anything positive to say about him. He often flirted with female colleagues, which led most people to avoid him. His co-workers frequently expressed their frustration, stating that he was hard to work with. Additionally, Gail mentioned that after his wife's death, Bruce boasted about the fortune he would inherit. To Gail, this seemed like a desperate attempt to win her over romantically. This information prompted Detective Bob to investigate further into Moylanen's marriage. The detectives anticipated that Judy and Bruce would have frequent arguments due to his flirtations at work. However, they found no evidence that Judy was aware of Bruce's inappropriate actions towards his female colleagues. They also discovered that the Moylanen family faced financial difficulties in the months leading up to Judy's death, primarily due to Bruce's reckless spending and irresponsibility. Bruce had accumulated significant debt, and his situation worsened to the point where he had to borrow money from one lender to pay another. Throughout their marriage, Judy had managed the financial strain with her income, but she was starting to feel overwhelmed by Bruce's behavior, especially with the added responsibility of caring for their daughter. Detectives found that weeks before Judy's death, Bruce started accumulating insurance policies under her name. Many of these policies included a double indemnity clause, which meant they would pay out double if Judy died accidentally. Detective Bob questioned whether Bruce viewed this as a way to solve both his financial issues and eliminate his wife. Following Judy's death, Bruce was close to receiving a financial payout of $330,000 from her life insurance policies. Investigators uncovered a disturbing fact. In 1991, nearly 14 months before Judy's death, she suffered a serious accident. An 85-pound chimney block fell from a roof where Bruce was working and struck Judy on the head, nearly killing her. Fortunately, she survived but sustained a severe concussion and spent several days in the hospital. Shortly after this incident, a fire broke out in the Moylanen house while Judy was sleeping alone inside. Thankfully, she woke up in time and was able to call the fire department. Judy felt frightened after the two incidents. Many of her friends informed the detectives that Judy had shared her desire to leave her husband, mentioning a feeling that something bad was happening around her. Despite this, she decides to continue the marriage for the sake of their daughter and keeping her feelings hidden from her family. At this point, Detective Bob was nearly convinced that Bruce Moylanen had murdered his wife and staged it as a hunting accident. Unfortunately, they lacked the physical evidence needed to prove it. Desperate for answers, Detective Bob contacted Dan Castle, an expert in metal detectors who had previously assisted law enforcement. Aware that the fatal bullet was still hidden in the woods, Bob requested Dan's help in locating it. Dan diligently used his metal detector every day, but this time he faced a significant challenge and found nothing. After weeks of searching, the snow had completely obscured any signs of the bullet. Despite this setback, Dan remained determined to continue the search. Dan conducted an experiment using a slingshot to replicate the bullet's trajectory and pinpoint its possible landing spot. Fortunately, his method was successful. After searching the area where his marbles bounced off the snow, he discovered the bullet about 80 feet from the maple tree. Although this find was significant, authorities still needed to verify whether it was the bullet that killed Judy or just another one from hunting season. Ray Kenny, a firearm examiner at the Marquette State Police Crime Lab, was assigned to analyze a bullet he had discovered. Within a few days, he identified it as a .30 caliber round that matched wood fibers from the tree it struck. Ray confirmed it was indeed the bullet that hit the tree, but he also uncovered more significant evidence. He found a small pink fiber from the shirt Judy was wearing and some black fibers from her jacket. This provided a crucial connection in the case, marking a significant breakthrough. The investigators next focused on Bruce's notable gun collection. They tested all the rifles that might have fired the fatal bullet and identified 4 potential firearms. At this point, Bruce had no choice but to tell the truth, yet he still chose to lie. He denied owning any of those rifles, but his luck quickly ran out. Judy and Bruce's financial records revealed loan documents listing his gun collection as collateral. Additionally, detectives found an asset list that included a rifle Bruce had failed to disclose. This rifle, which had a scope, matched one of the 4 potential firearms that could have fired the bullet. Investigators eventually concluded that the firearm was likely the murder weapon. They recognized that uncovering the truth was critical at this stage. On April 23, 1993, 5 months into the investigation, Bruce finally agreed to take a polygraph test after previously avoiding it for months. During the initial part of the test, Bruce was calm while answering the investigators' questions. In an effort to elicit the truth, detectives placed a letter from Gail on the table in front of him. This moment marked a turning point in the interview, as Bruce began to share a different story. For the first time, Bruce realized that Gail was secretly working with the police, or he feared that the authorities had finally caught up with him. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears and confessed to murdering his wife. After months of denial, he admitted that on November 29, 1992, he had seen a perfect opportunity to kill her. He explained that during the first 2 times he spotted Judy through the trees, he aimed his gun but couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. However, on the 3rd occasion, he closed his eyes and fired, resulting in her death. Bruce explained his motive for the murder by saying that Judy had threatened to divorce him and he wanted to avoid the breakup. To rationalize his actions, he described Judy as a harsh person both at work and at home, and he criticized her cooking. Regarding the murder weapon, Bruce stated that he threw the rifle into a nearby river, but the police were unable to find it during their search. He also pointed out an error in the medical examiner's report, which claimed Judy was shot on the left side of her chest. Bruce insisted that she was shot on the right side, with the bullet exiting on the left. This detail was significant in his confession, as it was information that only the killer would know. Bruce Moylanen was quickly arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Despite confessing to the crime, he pleaded not guilty, arguing that the police forced him to confess. Although prosecutors already had substantial evidence against Bruce, they chose to collect more in anticipation of the trial. Investigators examined the chimney block incident. Bruce had initially stated that he accidentally knocked it off with his foot, but they found it was too heavy to fall without being intentionally pushed. The trial primarily favored the prosecution, supported by numerous witnesses and evidence. Bruce remained mostly silent but began to cry when Gail testified. In contrast, the defense had no witnesses to present. Bruce's lawyer, Thomas Castleman, argued that his potential witnesses were too afraid to come forward. He described the investigation as coercive and claimed that the police had extracted Bruce's confession by force. Ultimately, the jury did not believe Bruce's explanation, and on December 15, 1993, they found him guilty. On January 21, 1994, Bruce Moylanen was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. This decision brought comfort to Judy's family, who had previously questioned his guilt. Judy's brother and sister-in-law, David and Yvonne Blake, took in 5-year-old Elise. This marks the tragic end of a man motivated by greed who believed he could commit the perfect murder. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Kristen Trickle. Kristen Trickle was born on August 14, 1993, in a small town in southeast Nebraska. Her childhood was not particularly busy or troubled. However, her biological mother abandoned the family when Kristen was less than 3 years old. She left her husband and daughter for another man, moved to California, and never cared about their fate again. Kristen's father, James, raised his daughter alone, doing his best to ensure she lacked nothing. However, he contracted a serious illness that gradually worsened, and when Kristen turned 16, her father passed away. With no other close relatives, the girl could have been placed in a shelter until she became an adult. However, an aunt and uncle on her father's side, who lived in neighboring Kansas, intervened. Although they were raising 3 children of their own, they expressed a desire to adopt the orphan girl and did their best to ensure she had a comfortable and happy life. Soon after, the girl moved into their family home. In her new family, Kristen never felt like an outsider. Instead, her aunt and uncle treated her like their own child, showering her with love and care. Kristen was a good student who participated in art activities, helped her family with housework, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because of her love for animals. Family and friends described her as easygoing, kind, friendly, and very gentle. She was confident in pursuing her goals and spreading optimism to those around her. The Kristen's relative family was very religious, attending church regularly on Sundays. It was here that 18-year-old Kristen met Colby, a young man who was an aspiring musician, performing in a band that played music during sermons and prayer services. Colby, who had just turned 18, was very talented and dreamed of building a successful music career in the future. The 2 young people quickly developed a close relationship that later blossomed into romantic love. Colby was an excellent guitar player and composed his own songs, which he used to win the hearts of his loved ones. He was open, sociable, cheerful, and easy to befriend, often becoming the life of any party. After graduating from high school, he showed an interest in military affairs and decided to join the Army. At the age of 18, he signed several contracts and began serving in the United States Armed Forces. Over the next 3 years, he built a solid military career. Throughout this time, he maintained regular contact with Kristen, keeping in touch and corresponding frequently. At the age of 21, Colby abruptly enlisted in the reserves, returned home, and proposed to his sweetheart, who happily accepted. They were married in April 2014. The newlywed couple settled in a small town in Kansas, where Colby finished college and pursued a music career, albeit without much success. He performed at small parties and local events, playing cover versions of popular hits. They had 2 dogs that they adored, and many considered their marriage to be quite happy. However, after many years of marriage, a terrible tragedy occurred. On a gloomy Halloween night, October 31, 2019, around 4 a.m., an emergency call was placed to the police department. The caller, a man named Colby Trickle, reported that his wife, Kristen, had shot herself in the head with a revolver in their home. Paramedics and a nearby police cruiser were quickly dispatched to the scene. At the front door, Colby greeted the officers and allowed them inside, but he himself remained outside. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Colby remained calm. When the officers entered the bedroom, they found Kristen lying on the bed in a pool of her own blood. She had been shot with a large revolver lying on her stomach. Although she appeared to be dead, she surprisingly moved her arms, and an officer found a weak pulse and detected breathing. She was then moved to the next room and placed correctly on the floor for resuscitation efforts. However, despite these efforts, she was dead by the time the ambulance arrived, and the medical team could only confirm her death. Sergeant Brandon Hotman informed Colby that his wife had passed away. Colby repeatedly asked the officer to confirm this information. When he received confirmation, Colby began to cry. However, Colby's behavior and tears did not seem genuine, as just minutes before Brandon arrived, Colby was happily chatting with other patrolmen about video games. At first glance, it seemed that Kristen had ended her life voluntarily. However, when examining the scene, experienced detectives suspected foul play. It was Halloween night, and she seemed to have been actively preparing for the celebration. In the bedroom, on the dressing table, there were homemade costume decorations, and in the kitchen, there were children's themed foods such as lollipops and ghost-shaped gummy bears. Her death was unusual and unlike the typical manner in which a woman might pass away. First, she was found almost naked, wearing only underwear. Women often want to look beautiful even after death and worry about how they will be discovered. Second, shooting herself in the head was not a common practice for women, again due to concerns about disfiguring their bodies. Kristen's face was so badly damaged that she had to be buried in a sealed coffin. The strangest and most telling thing was that the pistol was too large and bulky for her small and fragile body. She would have had difficulty holding it. Furthermore, the position of the gun on her stomach and to the side confused the police. After realizing what had happened, Colby considered putting the gun to his head. However, he ultimately abandoned the idea and decided to call emergency services, hoping to save his loved one. While law enforcement continued to work at the scene, her cell phone lying on the nightstand suddenly went off. Kristen apparently planned and prepared for the morning, but then changed her mind and decided to end her life that night. This raised suspicions, and detectives believed that this may have been a well-orchestrated case. Colby, considered to be the prime suspect, would soon be brought in for questioning. Colby's agreed to go to the police station to give a statement. He appeared upset but not broken, remaining calm and confident. He explained that his wife, Kristen, had returned from her management job at Walmart that evening, where she was hoping to be promoted to senior manager. After that, they had been playing video games together. Colby then went to bed early because he was feeling unwell, while Kristen went into the kitchen to clean and prepare holiday sweets. In the middle of the night, Colby was awakened by a sudden loud bang. For a few seconds, he was disoriented, his ears ringing, and he could not see anything in the darkness. When he turned on the light, he saw his wife lying motionless next to him, bleeding from her head. He tried to resuscitate her but realized it was futile. He then held the pistol first to his head. But then changed his mind. He decided to place the gun on his wife's stomach and eventually called emergency services and went outside to meet the police. His actions and behavior raised many questions. For example, why did he place the weapon on his wife's stomach instead of throwing it on the floor, the bed, or leaving it on the nightstand? It is also unclear why he waited outside for the police and paramedics if he thought his wife could still be saved. Normally, in such an emergency situation, people would try to perform first aid or apply pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding. When the police arrived, he did not approach his wife, claiming that he was in shock. While a police officer was trying to perform first aid before the paramedics arrived, Colby did not appear concerned or ask about the situation. Instead, he casually chatted outside with a patrol officer about music and video games. When he learned that Kristen had died, he tried to calm down after shedding a few tears. At the police station, Colby was asked if Kristen had life insurance. He replied that she did not, but added that he was entitled to some small payments from the armed forces, where he had served. Colby then began to brag about his accomplishments, that he had served in intelligence and participated in special operations around the world. His explanation sounded convincing, but almost everything he said turned out to be inaccurate. When asked why his wife might have committed such a desperate act, he explained that she had suffered from symptoms of depression since childhood. Colby's statement sounded convincing, and he spoke confidently and calmly. However, experienced investigators believed that he was lying and that he may have prepared what he would say. Nevertheless, they had no concrete evidence to charge him at the time, so Colby was released. When Kristen's relatives were informed of her tragic death, they quickly traveled to Hayes, 500 miles from where they lived, to meet with the police and make funeral arrangements. They were unanimous in denying that she had taken her own life, citing her deep religious beliefs, regular church attendance, and the belief that such an act was sinful. According to her family, Kristen was an optimistic, life-loving person with ambitious plans for the future. She wanted to open a shelter for homeless animals and had been looking for an available property with a large plot of land that she planned to lease long-term for this purpose. Detectives also confirmed that she had been in negotiations to lease the property. She was expecting a promotion at work and was proud of her position. She was also preparing costumes and candy for Halloween and had promised to visit her sister on her birthday in mid-November. Her relatives insisted that she had never suffered from depression and had no mental disorders or harmful habits. Another important point they stressed was that she would never abandon her dogs. In their discussions with the police, her aunt and uncle suggested that Colby may have treated his wife in a cold, staged manner to make it appear that she had voluntarily left this world. They described her husband as a cruel, domineering man who tried to control every aspect of her interactions, throwing tantrums if Kristen did not return his calls or texts immediately. Her husband had forced her not to talk to her family and to call them in secret, without telling him. Family visits were rare. On her last visit, she told her husband that she could no longer stand the treatment and that if things did not improve, they would have to divorce. The results of the forensic examination and the expert opinions after interviews with Colby and Kristen's family led detectives to believe that the forensic report would be crucial in the case. The forensic report found only one gunshot wound to the chin. The bullet was fired while she was lying on her back, with the barrel of the gun pressed against her head. It is possible that she inflicted the wound herself, although it is highly unlikely that she did so. There were no signs of struggle or resistance on Kristen's body. However, after learning from relatives that Colby had been violent and controlling, detectives requested a further examination for any signs of bruising, abrasions, scratches, or other injuries in various stages of healing. They hypothesized that if he occasionally abused his wife, there would be signs of it. However, the investigation was disappointing because no injuries were found on her, except for the gunshot wound. During the investigation, the authorities studied Colby thoroughly, including his personality. Through this, they discovered that Colby was a pathological liar. He had a habit of lying frequently and very convincingly, to the point that he seemed to believe his own lies. Colby provided false information about his musical achievements and income to those around him, even though he was not involved in intelligence activities or any hotspots, and convinced everyone during the interrogation that he was telling the truth. Kristen, a hard worker, had been the main economic pillar for the family for many years. In contrast, Colby only had income from occasional performances during the holidays, and the rest of his time was spent playing video games. Although Colby had real talent, he lacked perseverance and patience and was hindered by his own laziness. Police conducted a search of Kristen's phone apps and found a wealth of information. They found a phone calendar filled with everything from haircuts to meetings with a real estate agent. Also, Colby's text messages showed that he had openly flirted with another woman and exchanged messages while at the police station. On the laptop in the living room, a search history from before the incident was recovered, showing that Colby had searched for life insurance benefits in case of the death of a loved one. This was particularly important to the authorities. The check showed that Colby had lied, as he had purchased 2 insurance policies for his wife, with himself as the beneficiary if she died. The contracts included insurance for his wife, along with a standard life insurance policy. The amount involved was significant, contradicting his previous statements. He had even calculated exactly how much he would receive. Although the direct allegations from the victim's relatives were critical of Colby and suggested clear motives, the final decision still depended on the forensic expert's report. According to the documents, there were no signs of violence on the victim's body other than the gunshot wound, which suggested that the victim most likely ended her life voluntarily. The case was closed and archived. At that time, Colby had received compensation from 2 insurance policies related to his wife. Specifically, he received nearly $50,000 from one special insurance policy and more than $100,000 from another life insurance policy. Once the money was deposited into the account, he purchased a lifelike doll from an online store. He also bought a new video game console, an electric guitar, and expensive musical equipment, and then spent the rest on clothing and entertainment, especially going to bars and restaurants almost every night. Colby was enjoying life, not saving money for himself, and believed that the matter was over since there was no evidence against him and, therefore, no potential charges. He lived happily for about 2 years until a significant event occurred in the summer of 2021. A new prosecutor was appointed. The detectives in charge of the Kristen Trickle case asked the new prosecutor for help. They wanted permission to reopen the investigation on the grounds that there was no doubt Colby had killed his wife. To prove Colby's guilt, the prosecutor presented strange and unusual evidence, including the recovery of the suspect's web browsing history and pointing to his clear actions and motives. After reviewing the relevant documents, the prosecutor decided to reopen the case, and Colby was arrested in July 2021. He was charged with first-degree manslaughter and willful obstruction of justice. While in custody, he remained calm and immediately contacted his attorneys, who began working on his defense. Colby's defense relied on the results of the medical examiner's examination, which revealed that Kristen had suffered from chronic depression for many years and that her tragic death was only a matter of time. During the trial, the attorneys attempted to portray their client as a loving husband, a brave soldier, and a person of good faith. However, without the results of the psychological autopsy, the investigation could have been crippled because it relied too heavily on the same medical findings. To help clarify the case and the investigation, the prosecution took a new step by bringing in experienced psychologists. They conducted a psychological analysis of the victim and investigated her emotional state immediately before the incident. This method is called a psychological autopsy or psychological exhumation. Psychiatrists conducted a comprehensive assessment of Kristen's situation, including analyzing data from her phone, social media posts, recent photographs, and interviews with relatives, friends, and colleagues. Although the process of collecting and analyzing this information took months, the experts' conclusion was clear that Kristen did not intend to end her life, as she still had both short-term and long-term plans. Legal proceedings related to this complex case were not initiated until September 2023, nearly 4 years after the incident. The defendant had clear motives, behaved suspiciously, and repeatedly lied during interrogation, but the initial conclusions of forensic experts were favorable to him. However, the prosecution now had another report that could potentially change the outcome of the case. When asked about the insurance claim web queries on his computer, Colby said it was possible his wife had filed a claim to get paid. However, the timing of the claim contradicts his statement, as his wife was confirmed to be at work at the time. The store's surveillance cameras proved it. When asked about the life-size doll he had purchased even before burying his late wife, along with other expenses, he said that he could not sleep alone and needed someone to be with him. He explained that he had purchased several other items, such as a console and a guitar, to help ease the sadness of losing his wife. The defendant's mother corroborated her son's testimony, vigorously defending him throughout the trial. The psychologist's conclusions about the victim's emotional state were crucial. This detailed assessment took time, but the results confirmed that Kristen did not intend to finish off herself. Important details regarding the angle of the bullet were presented in the autopsy report. In court, the jury was shown the weapon used and the angle at which the bullet struck the victim's chin. Although Kristen was right-handed, the injury suggested that she had either fired with her left hand or that a third person had held a gun to her head while she was asleep and fired. On November 20, 2023, the jury unanimously found Colby guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 50 years. He has always denied his guilt, but all of his appeals have been denied. Notably, in this case, amendments to the medical report regarding the cause of death were never made. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Vera Pekdaleva. Vera Pekdaleva was born on September 24, 1997 in Kyslov, located in Kovo Oblast. Growing up, Vera became a cheerful and creative person with a passion for singing. Her talent helped her win first place in many singing competitions while she was still in school. Although her parents, Oksana and Yevhen, divorced while she was still in school, Vera maintained a close relationship with both of them. She also got along well with her stepmother and stepfather. People who knew her described Vera as a kind, positive, and gentle person. Vera surprised her family when she decided to pursue a technical education instead of a creative path after graduating from high school. She attended the State Technical University in Kovo. Although Vera lives in Kovo, she maintains a close relationship with her mother, Oksana, who lives in Kyslov, about 110 miles away. During a visit to her mother in 2016, Vera met a man her age named Vladislav Kanis, commonly known as Vladislav. Unlike Vera, Vladislav did not set goals in life, was withdrawn, and had a volatile temper. Vladislav dropped out of school after the 9th grade and grew up in a dysfunctional family. His mother left home, so he lived with his father. However, the difficulties in his life did not stop there. His father had problems with the law, and it all culminated in his suicide, all before Vladislav's eyes. This left a lasting impact on him. Despite their very different backgrounds, Vera developed strong feelings for Vladislav, loving him deeply. Vera's parents knew Vladislav and were against their relationship. Although they felt sorry for Vladislav for his difficult life, they envisioned a different life for Vera. "We did not approve of her choice, expecting her to eventually end the relationship," said her mother, Oksana. Vera's father asked her to break up with Vladislav when he found out about their relationship, but Vera refused. Instead, she simply stopped talking about him to her parents. Vera's mother, Oksana, remembers that Vladislav was never present at family gatherings and never appeared in Vera's social media photos, as if Vera was deliberately trying to hide him. It is worth noting that in 2019, Vera and Vladislav began living together in Kovo. Vera's parents supported them financially by helping to pay the rent for the apartment. At that time, Vladislav was unemployed and relied on Vera for financial support. She was not only beautiful and intelligent but also financially stable. The relationship between Vladislav and Vera became strained due to Vladislav's excessive drinking, and he showed no signs of stopping. Vera's parents suspected that he was abusing their daughter. In November 2019, Vera decided to end the relationship. However, Vladislav refused to accept this and did not want it to end. Vladislav was supposed to be the one to move out, but he had no intention of doing so. He wanted to enjoy the benefits of living off someone else. 3 minutes later, Vera sent a new voice message to her friend, asking her to come help Vera move. However, before Vera could finish her sentence, Vladislav interrupted, firmly stating, "No, no one is coming in here," implying that he did not approve of her friend coming to their apartment to help her move. At around 5:15 p.m., Vera quietly asked her friend to come over, presumably because she needed help. Vera spoke softly, presumably so that Vladislav would not hear. 10 minutes later, at 5:25 p.m., Vera sent another voice message. This time, Vladislav responded loudly, telling Vera's friend not to come over and to wait for Vera to text her. Nearly 2 hours later, at 7:19 p.m., Vladislav took control of Vera's phone, sending a voice message himself. From that point on, Vera no longer had access to her phone and was left alone with Vladislav. At 3 a.m., a commotion broke out when the neighbors on the same floor were awakened by terrifying screams coming from apartment 738. A witness described the scene as a massacre, vividly recounting the horrors unfolding before their eyes. The screams were deafening, attracting a crowd of 15 people to the hallway near the apartment. Vladislav's brother was among them. He had heard Vladislav say that he was going to kill Vera. The brother realized that immediate intervention was needed. However, the iron door of the apartment was a formidable barrier. The neighbors began looking for tools that would allow them to break down the door and stop the unfolding tragedy. All this time, Vera's screams of pain continued to be heard from the apartment. A serious incident occurred when the police failed to respond promptly to emergency calls. At around 3 a.m., people called the emergency services after witnessing a traumatic situation involving Vera and her ex-boyfriend, Vladislav. Despite receiving numerous calls, the police did not arrive at the scene until 6:30 a.m., 3.5 hours later. Vera's neighbors, desperate for help, called the emergency services 7 times. As Vera fought for her life, but no one came. The last words that the neighbors heard from Vladislav were, "Vera, forgive me, I love you very much." As the situation escalated, the neighbors found a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down Vera's door. Unfortunately, they were met with a tragic scene. Vera was lying motionless, while Vladislav was found drunk in the bathroom. And the neighbors tried in vain to get help from the police. Operator 112 were socializing, laughing and drinking tea while discussing their lives, and were very unhappy that they were disturbed. Police arrived at the scene only after being informed that Vera had died. They initially blamed their delayed response on a lack of fuel in one of their vehicles and not enough officers on duty due to other emergencies. The operator, 112, and the police officer on duty that night were both brought to trial. Police station footage was released during the investigation, revealing their indifferent attitude. Vladislav's testimony confirmed that there was no conflict between him and Vera until 5 a.m. Vladislav recalled an argument with Vera on December 15, 2019, which occurred because he wanted to go to a nightclub, but she refused. This incident was not the beginning of their problems, as Vera had mentioned ending their relationship a month earlier. She also began to spend more time with Kaislav and less time with him. Vladislav also found out from a mutual friend that Vera was in a relationship with another man named Alexander, from Kaislav. Although he did not know Alexander, Vladislav still wanted to discuss this with Vera. Despite the tension between them, they still lived in the same apartment and kept in touch by phone. After an argument on December 15, 2019, Vera left the apartment, taking some of her belongings with her. On January 12, 2020, he contacted Vera to offer to help her move the rest of her belongings to a new apartment. She accepted his offer and they planned to meet the next day to complete the move. Vera scheduled a meeting with him on the afternoon of January 13, 2020 so they could pick up her belongings and transport them to her new apartment. However, his plan was not just to help Vera move, he also intended to move out, as he did not want to continue living in the apartment without her. When Vera arrived on January 13, 2020, between 4 o'clock and 6 p.m., we decided to pack both of our belongings, making it a joint move. On January 14, 2020, they consumed a large amount of alcohol, including beer, spirits, and vodka, while packing. By about 5 a.m., I was drunk, and so was Vera. Initially, there were no problems between them. However, things changed when he brought up their past relationship and told her that he knew she was seeing someone else. Vera felt offended by this, and the conversation escalated into a heated argument. She became aggressive, used foul language, and physically assaulted him. Specifically, she kicked him several times in the groin and hit him several times in the face with the palm of her hand. The slaps did not cause him significant pain, but the kicks to the groin did. Vera started a fight, which angered him. He was angry not only at her attacks, but also at her dishonesty about dating other people and accusations that he had crossed the line when discussing her personal life. During this time, Vladislav claimed that Vera continued to insult him, which was the story he told the police. However, the medical examination showed that he was lying. Vera's fatal injuries did not occur at the time of her death, but 6 hours earlier, around midnight. This timeline indicated that Vladislav had repeatedly beaten and injured Vera in the 6 hours before she died from her injuries. The examination found approximately 100 injuries on her body, including stab wounds, a broken nose, broken ribs, and signs of strangulation on her neck. After this tragic incident, Vera's funeral attracted more than 1,000 mourners, but the church was too small to accommodate everyone. Vera's grieving mother, Oksana, revealed that the funeral home spent 4 hours trying to recreate her daughter's severely damaged face using cosmetics. Despite these efforts, Oksana could barely recognize her own child, such was the severity of her injuries. Meanwhile, Vladislav was telling the police his story of what had happened. Of course, he tried to downplay his role in the crime. In addition, the presence of Vladislav's brother at the crime scene raised many questions, since he lived in another city. Vladislav gave an explanation for his brother's involvement. According to Vladislav, after the incident, he contacted his brother and informed him that Vera was no longer breathing. His brother advised him to call an ambulance and attempt artificial respiration and first aid on Vera. However, phone records show that Vladislav called his brother around midnight and said that he intended to kill Vera. During the interrogation, he was questioned about the injuries on Vera's body. In response, he said that it was likely that he had inflicted them, although he did not remember how many times he had hit her. The injuries recorded by the expert could have been inflicted by him. He admitted to having inflicted all the injuries listed in the report. During the altercation, his main goal was to achieve silence, and he did not consider Vera's pain. Vera screamed and insulted him throughout the fight. He made it clear that he did not feel pleasure in hitting her. Instead, he wanted her to stop screaming. And the investigation found that the police and emergency services personnel were negligent. Despite this, they were not suspended during the investigation and continued to defend their actions. The prosecutor pushed for actual prison sentences for the 5 defendants, but the judge decided to reduce the sentences from 1.5 years to 2 years of suspended imprisonment. Along with the sentence, the court ordered each police officer to pay about $350 to the victim. The police department was also ordered to pay about $111,000. Russia has its own currency, the ruble, but I have converted all the amounts to US dollars so that everyone can understand these numbers. The indictment states that the police had gasoline, and even if they did not, they should have taken appropriate measures to resolve the situation. Furthermore, the police refused to cooperate with the investigation and did not take responsibility for their actions. According to their account, when witnesses reported hearing a woman's desperate cries for help, the police team was in another location investigating the discovery of a man's body. We will probably never know what really happened that night. Vera had planned to move out of the apartment and even asked a friend to help. With this, it can be assumed that Vladislav forced Vera to drink alcohol or poured alcohol into her mouth while she was unconscious. This gave him time to fabricate a story that portrayed the events as unintentional. In 2022, the court sentenced Vladislav Kanis to 17 years in prison. Although Vladislav admitted partial guilt and was ordered to pay about $45,000 in compensation, Vera's parents were shocked by the outcome. They felt that 17 years was too light a sentence and planned to appeal. However, their efforts were soon in vain. Vladislav did not even serve a year in prison. In April 2023, it became known that he had received a presidential pardon after 6 months of participating in the armed conflict. You all know what kind of conflict Russia is currently involved in. He was also exempted from paying any compensation to Vera's parents. In November 2023, photos of Vladislav in military uniform appeared on social media. Vera's case has caused widespread outrage in Russia. The news of Vladislav's pardon was no less resounding. Here is what the Russian presidential press secretary had to say on the matter. The pardon process consists of several steps. First, the convicted person must publicly admit his guilt. This initial decision is made by the Federal Penitentiary Service, followed by reviews at the regional and federal levels, and then by the Central Committee. Only after passing these stages does the president take up the case for consideration. In addition, convicted people, including those who committed serious crimes, can be redeemed through their bravery on the battlefield, risking their lives under fire. This can be seen as a way for them to atone for their past mistakes. Imagine the painful emotions Vera's parents must have gone through when they learned that the person responsible for taking their daughter's life had been given a second chance. In stark contrast, Vera will never have the chance to start over, as her life was tragically cut short, leaving her with no chance of redemption.